Welcome to the channel. Thank you everyone for tuning in. Now join me today. We are going to be doing a critical comparison between two very popular watches. So let's have a quick look at the watches that we are going to compare, and I'll roughly explain if this is the first time watching this kind of review or this kind of comparison. I'll tell you exactly how this works and what it's all about. So the watches that we are going to do this comparison on is the Steeldive 6105 Captain Willard Homage. Their model number is SD1970, and we are going to compare it with the Heimdallr 6105. Now initially when I did a couple of comparisons with the Steeldive, I had a few requests for this to go up against the Heimdallr. So I have got the Heimdallr in now, and we will be breaking this down element by element. So what is a critical comparison? Now we know there's a lot of speculation when it comes to these AliExpress homages. Everyone says they're from the same factory. Sometimes that is the case, but not actually always. So the way this comparison works, I had to design a template, and basically this template helps me ascertain, which is better by value for money factor. Now the way I determine that is, I'll take subjectivity out of it, and I look at something called value add. How do I gauge what's better? Well, I use this template. Let's give an example. Let's look at the dial. So I'll take a look at the indices, the hands, the finish style, the logo, the font, is it applied, printed, date windows, color, finish alignment, lume, chapter rings, etc. And the reason I break it down in this way is you need to look at what's cost more, that value add activity. So let's give you guys an example. So if the dial, you've got one with applied indices, etc., versus a dial with just lume, no applied indices. The one with applied indices, to me, that's add more value add to it. So that will get a point over the other dial. So it's a very easy format. And at the end, you get a total score. And then we can obviously compare that to the value for money, what the watches are going for. Then we can actually put a number to the price. And that's how we sort of figure it out. And I find this way works, for those really detailed, critical comparisons basically. And we're not going to look at logos, we're not looking at branding, we're just looking at the actual watches themselves. So let's go ahead. Now before we look at what the differences are, let's go ahead and look at what the similarities are. Now I've got both watches here. I don't know when they came out. I bought my first Steeldive 6105 about a year and a half ago when I started my channel, just before that actually. So, and the Heimdallr, I believe it was around at the same time. So let's have a look at what we have on both watches. Let's start off by looking at specifications. Now both have a sapphire crystal, both are 316Al stainless steel, both have ceramic bezel inserts, both use the Seiko Epson NH35 option, both do actually come with a stainless steel bracelet. So I've gone with the SS bracelet option. In my personal opinion, both watches and the 6105 case in general looks much better on a waffle or a retro vintage strap. So as mentioned, specifications, both are exactly the same. Now let's go ahead and look at dimensions. So both cases are 43.7 millimeters in diameter. Both cases have a log to log of 46.8, and both cases have a thickness of 13.5 millimeters. So exactly the same. Now off the bat, just on dimensions, I will tell you where they both differ. They differ on the crowns. So if you follow the 6105 from Steeldive, you'll know they have made a few improvements to this version. The main ones being a version 1 and version 2. They've also made subtle changes as they've gone along, which I'll cover throughout the the length of this review. Now the crown, the first crown that Steeldive used was the exact same crown as you see on the Heimdallr. They have since reduced the size, and the difference there is they both have a 6.3 mil diameter, but the thickness or the width of the crown has reduced, whereas the 6105 is at 4.2 mil and the Heimdallr is actually at 4.8 mil. Both are exactly the same, the way they've been machined. So there's the watches are very, very similar. So there is a case that both cases have actually come from the same place. Now the secondary difference when it comes to diameter, I'll cover this one now, is when it comes to the size of the actual bezels. Now I noticed this while I was doing my notes for the review. Now you can see that there's slightly less case here that's being exposed, ever so slight. So I measured the bezels. Now the 6105 bezel diameter comes in at 41.3 millimeters, whereas the Heimdallr is at 40.6. Right? Slight difference. Yeah, so both watches weigh exactly the same also. There's a 1 gram difference. I weighed the Steeldive at 185 and the Heimdallr at 186. So again, specs, dimensions, weight, exactly the same more or less. So then how do you figure out what's better? I think this is exactly where that template comes in, because then I can break down the smaller features like dial. You know, it's all about attention to detail, the overall quality. So some dials and hands are finished quite differently, where you know, they do look significantly better, or where, you know, they will be more expensive depending on what's actually been done with them in terms of how they've been manufactured. So let's do a wrist check. I've got my Proxima Gilt MM300. That's a gorgeous looking watch. And of course, as always, make sure you hit the subscribe button, hit the notifications bell so you're up to date with all the latest reviews, and check the description for any links I'll post in there relating to the watches that I am reviewing. So let's go ahead and look at this comparison. So what is the first thing that we are going to look at? Of course, let's start off with the dial, the main thing that you see. So let's go in a bit closer on both watches. So have a look at that. Now, the Steeldive on the left is a sterile version, no logos anyway. And like I said, we're not judging them by branding. We're not judging them by, you know, subjectives. What logo is better, this, that, the other. No, we're going to just judge it by the actual features present. So let's go ahead, break this down. So both watches do have applied indices. So they've got very, very similar setup, if not exactly the same. They've got applied indices. They've got printed text. They've got printed minute track around the dial. You know, the Heimdallr comes with like a lot more text underneath. It's also got that SUA logo here, which you find on the Seikos. Now, I don't know how people feel about that. I don't know how I feel about that, because this is a homage, but it doesn't mean it needs to go down to the exact same thing, because of course this is not SUA related. And then at the bottom you got limited 6105 edition 8110. Okay, again, you know, slightly got to be cautious with that. But then on the Steeldive, you just got automatic, water, 200 meters. So similar setup on the dial. Both also have applied date windows. Okay, now the difference is the Steeldive comes with a printed logo when you do have one with the logo, and the Heimdallr actually has an applied logo. So that's the first thing, you know, applying a logo is always going to cost more than printing a logo. Okay, so a bit of extra work required. So that's one thing that I've noticed. Now, the second thing is we can look at the indices. Okay, so the Steeldive indices are slightly duller. Now, they did have a slight change from version 1 to version 2. It wasn't exactly clear, but I think it was a cost-saving exercise because the Lume reduced quite a bit, you could tell. And now, looking at the Heimdallr, you can see straight away, sorry, much, much better. A lot brighter. Okay, so that's our second key difference, aside from the applied logo. Now, the third thing which I've noticed is the handsets. So what I will do, we'll put up some really close macro shots of the hands if we need to. Let's see if you can see it here. So on the Heimdallr, on the Steeldive, now the hands look exactly the same, but there is quite a significant difference. You can see the hands here are polished and they're quite flat. There's no other features to it. There's no brushing, just fully polished, flat hands with Lume. Now we look at the Heimdallr. Now you can see straight away there is quite a bit of a difference. So you can see linear brushing going down to the center of the hands. You can also see chamfered edges which have been polished. So there's a lot more work that has gone into this, therefore adding value. Now the last thing we need to check is the Lume to basically, you know, score both these dials on these watches. So let's go ahead and have a look at that. So there we go. Let's have a look at that Lume. Now, I don't know if this comes across on camera really well, but the Heimdallr, the Lume on there is a lot more brighter. The Lume matches the hand color a lot better as well. Both the handset and the dial indices and the 12 o'clock pip are really well lit. Now, looking at the Steeldive on the left, you can see the handset's okay. It's loomed quite well. It actually matches the brightness on the Heimdallr to the right, but the dial is significantly poor. It is quite a lot duller. And what you also have on the Steeldive is you've got a fully illuminated ceramic bezel with BGW9 and just a pip at 12 on the Heimdallr. So clear difference there. And then the dial is visually poorer than it is on the Heimdallr. Let's take you through the breakdown to give you an idea of exactly how I'm doing this. Looking at the indices, minute track on both things, the little features. So you got applied on both sides. Just the Heimdallr one is a little bit better. So we're looking at hands. That's the first thing I noticed. So brushed, chamfered, polished compared to just normal flat polished. Date windows, both got applied date windows. Color. Now there's a slight color difference. You know, the dial on the 6105 from Steeldive is slightly a bit grayed out. But again, I don't think it's enough for it to show something significant by way of value add. The Lume, a lot better on the Heimdallr. So I've given it 3 points extra. So we've got 6 possible categories, one of them being nullified. So that would have been 7 because there's no chaptering on both. They've got minute tracks. So out of 6, the Steeldive only gets 3. The Heimdallr gets the full 6. Okay, so let's move on now to the crystal. Now, you might be thinking, you know, sapphire crystal is sapphire crystal. How can one be better than the other? Well, they can. I think suppliers do charge differently for, you know, the domed crystal versus a flat sapphire crystal. That will be slightly more, you know, if it's got chamfered edges, etc. Now, with both, they both have a flat air-coated sapphire crystal with chamfer edges. Now, the chamfer edge on this 6105 is particularly significant because the original had a domed crystal with the chamfer edge where it was quite sloped because it gives you the iconic refraction between. So it looks like you've got double indices or you've got the appearance of a phantom minute track. Now, that is significant to the actual overall look of the 6105 Captain Willard. And that's one of the things which a lot of people do like. Now, with the Steeldive, the crystal protrudes slightly. Okay. And you've got a slight bit of chamfer, as you can see, so you do get the refraction. Now, on the Heimdallr, you've got a flatter crystal, so the fit and finish is a lot better. I think the profile of these watches is important to maintain. They've got a very unique case shape. Now, that's flat. This is subjective. I prefer the flatter look, but in terms of value add, both are exactly the same. I don't see anything different between the two, which will make one more expensive than the other. So they both score evenly on this round. Look at the bezels now. So this is where it's going to get a bit trickier. Now, both use coin edge style bezels. Now, Steeldive did have a cost saving exercise from the first one, version 1. Now, that was still a coin edge, but it was slightly different. In fact, the bezel, if I can recall, it was just slightly more sloped. But this one's just flat. Now, I mentioned the size difference. The Steeldive is slightly bigger than the Heimdallr 6105. Now, in terms of finish, they finish exactly the same. Polished edge, polishing around the side. Again, same thing, polished lip, polished teeth. What it actually does come down to is the bezel insert and also the rotation. Now, both are 120 click unidirectional bezels, so dive bezels. Both do have very similar, if not exactly the same style of bezel insert in terms of the markings. But where they differ is, as you saw on the left, the Steeldive has a fully loomed BGW9 bezel with a flat pip, which is illuminated, whereas the Heimdallr does have the raised pip, which now, you know, talking to people, looking at it overall, people don't like this. Even though the pip is actually slightly less pronounced as it was on some of the older ones, it's still there. It's still something which people would rather do without. So either it needs to be a part of the bezel and sunk in, or, you know, it just needs to come off. So value add in terms of, I'd say the bezel on the 6105 is better because it's fully loomed. Yeah, so that's one of the first things. Now let's look at rotation. So let's start off with the Steeldive. So I'm going to shut for a moment so you can hear it. So on the 6105, the alignment is good. The rotation overall, it's not loose, it's not tight. I think there's a good amount of resistance. Positive clicks is single clicks, and the rotation itself is reasonably smooth. Now, the Steeldive has been through quite a few changes. The first bezel rotation on the first version 1 was okay, it was good. You just had a bit more friction. Now, when they did go to version 2, there was a lot more inconsistencies. The bezel was noticeably poorer. It had hot spots around the 10 p.m. mark, around I think the 4 p.m. as well. But the recent stuff, buttery smooth, very nice. I've been getting 6105s regularly, so I've seen or felt changes, and I had a good hands-on experience with the quality. Now, what I will say is 6105, the Steeldive, similar to Seiko bezels, they're very inconsistent. There is not one sort of standard, but this is very reasonable indeed. Guys that have got them yourselves, you'll be able to put in the comment section that some of them are really smooth. So let's have a look at the Heimdallr. So the Heimdallr also lines up pretty well. I don't see anything out of line there. Very good. Both are actually quite similar in the actual rotation. And I'd say Heimdallr is guilty of exactly the same thing as Steeldive, where in terms of the rotation, the consistency, some are very smooth, some are not so smooth. In particular, between the two, I'd say the 6105 is a bit smoother than the Heimdallr, but that's specific these two models. So I think the 6105 is going to come out on top. I think they're just doing something better. So I'm going to give the point to the 6105 on that. Okay, now let's move on to the case. The case, I'll save you guys some time, exactly the same. I've looked at the type of case, both have got the same case. Type of finishing, you've got brushing on the A face, circular brushing on the A face, polished sides, done to a very high quality standards. It's a bit grubby from my fingerprints, but both have got a very high standard of brushing, both have got a very high standard of polishing, and you know what, they are exactly the same. Going back to the weight with the bracelets, 185 on the left, 186 on the right. The crown, there's a slight difference to the crown. The one is bigger on the Heimdallr, but bigger doesn't always mean better. And then the case backs, now this is plain, but those familiar with the Steeldive will know that do come with the Steeldive logo on the back. And Heimdallr, we're very familiar with the type of engraving they do. Now this might constitute a bit of value add, but I'm going to put them at the same because the non-sterile version is also engraved, so it balances itself out. Now on case finish, both do score exactly the same. Let's see if we can give you some close-ups of the brushing. So it's okay. I have seen some Steeldive cases that come out a bit rough. Now I think these have been polished a little bit better, so I don't know if they are improving things. Steeldive don't actually tell anyone if they've made an improvement on a watch at all. So very smooth also on the Heimdallr. Next one we are going to look at is the bracelets. Now personally, I prefer both these watches to be on the waffle straps or the vintage tropical style straps, cloth straps, whatever. I just don't think stainless steel suits them. It looks okay, don't get me wrong, it looks actually okay, and I know a lot of people do wear them on the stainless steel bracelets. Both of mine I don't wear at all on the stainless steel straps. So anyway, let's start off by looking at the types of bracelets. Now, solid end links on both, solid links on both. They're both oyster style. They both taper from 20mm down to 18mm at the clasp. Both use these similar style clasps. However, on the Steeldive, as you know, it's a stamped clasp, and they've made an improvement by adding Steeldive logos. And the Heimdallr actually comes with an upgrade, milled clasp. So that's a point straight away to the Heimdallr. Now, moving across to the bracelets, like I said, the brushing exactly the same. I think they are more or less exactly the same bracelet. Now, where they differ is at the end links. So, fit and finish. Now, 6105 is a bit loose sometimes, right? There's quite a bit of play in the actual link. You'll see it sometimes you'll see the end link move. Now, the reason that is because purely due to the spring bars that they use. Now, Steeldive use 1.2mm diameter spring bars, the cheapest ones around. But when you order an extra strap, they give you the 1.6s. Now, when you use the 1.6s on this bracelet, it fits perfectly. There's no movement in it at all. So they need to use better spring bars. Now, one thing to notice here is two things actually. The end links actually cover the case here. And you also got a female end link just to give that extra articulation to the bracelet. Now, the Heimdallr fit and finish, solid, does not move. You know, it's got thicker bars. You can see them through the back. But the difference here is it doesn't curve as well as the Steeldive. You can see, sticks out slightly there. And you've also got male end links. So it doesn't enhance the articulation. And of course, people are going to prefer the one with the female end link. Both use split pins for the links. It is indeed a tough one. So you've got a milled clasp on the Heimdallr, which, yes, better. But you've got these female end links on the 6105, which is going to give you better wearability. You know, they got better spring bars on the Heimdallr, slightly poorer ones on the Steeldive. So you can see my predicament here. I think, you know, it's best then to just score them evenly on the bracelet, but just keep that in mind. I mean, what's going to affect you more? I think it's going to be maybe the end links again and the clasp, right? So back to square one, really. Okay, let's go ahead. Let's summarize. So let's cover up some stuff so it makes it easy to read. As mentioned, when it came to the dial, the Heimdallr came out on top, 6 versus 3. Let's look at the crystal. I said I scored it evenly, 2-2, style, coating, fit and finish. The bezel, the Steeldive came out on top because of the bezel insert and the actual just slightly better rotation, and that scored a 4-2 versus the Heimdallr. Case, exactly the same. Very difficult to sort of find anything different between the two. Now, after the case, we got down to the bracelet, strap. We're looking at material, fit, finish, clasp, fitting features, end link. As discussed, very difficult. So I did actually score the Heimdallr a bit better, but then I decided to even it out at 3 each. At the possible 4 they could have scored. And then we've got price. Let's look at the price. So the Steeldive, when it first came out, they were around 120, 110 on AliExpress. Now, you know, since it's become very, very competitive on AliExpress, you've got so many agents. You can get them as low as £74, but I've decided to keep it at around 80, which is, you know, what they're really going for on AliExpress. Very, very cheap. So, you know, they've gotten cheaper since the last time I think we looked at a comparison with the Steeldive. Heimdallr, so on AliExpress, £106, but we know the whole blacklist situation and, you know, official Heimdallr website, etc. So let's go by their website price. Their website price is £122. Color options, what do you get with both watches? So the Steeldive comes in 3 different colors, a full black, full blue, and a full green. And then the Heimdallr actually comes with bezel insert options, whereas the dial stays the same. So you've got, I believe there might be aluminium, I'm not too sure, but you've got Pepsi, black, green, you know, what the other colors. So, I mean, that's variation, neither here or there. And then both use the Seiko Epson NH35. Now, Heimdallr did do a high beat option. I believe there was an ETA and the Seagull ST2130 as well, which obviously cost significantly more. So where does that leave us on the points? So I scored them both 18 for the Steeldive and 19 for the Heimdallr. So between the prices, this is our workout value for money, right? So you've got 80 here, You've got 120 here. Let's just round up, and you've got 40 pounds. Right? How much? What is the point difference? There's 1 point between the two, maximum 2. Okay, if we went back to original scoring, that basically means is 20 pounds per point, right? So that just shows, again, Steeldive is the winner. Amazing value for money, exceptional value for money. And the Heimdallr, again, it's really good, but I've mentioned it before. I think the Steeldive is just priced too low. That's what it is. It's extremely competitive. I know there's not a lot of profit margin for the people that are doing it, but that's their problem, right? As a consumer, that's not our concern. And there's the Heimdallr, just comes in at a very close second. Now you probably want to know about the rest. I've done various ones. I'd say the San Martin, you know, it's going to be priced quite a bit away. Is there any need to get that? I don't think there's any need, because they're not giving you anything that significantly different or better. And that's the end of the critical comparison. Let me know your thoughts on this, guys. See if you like this format and if it makes sense to you. So anyway, I will see you on the next video. Thank you everyone for watching.